Welcome to Playing Above the Line's very first mini-series. I'm Alan, your host, and this episode is one of 10 we're recording with T.R. Miller's legendary football coach, Jamie Riggs. Playing Above the Line is sponsored by Aviso Group, a business consulting and accounting firm focused on preparing clients for the future through innovation and positive growth. This episode is sponsored by Bruton Insurance Agency. You can stop by and talk to owners Steve Nelson and Larry Crosby or any of their other team members. They are Bruton's hometown experts ready to take care of your personal or commercial insurance needs. They're located at 1014 Douglas Avenue in Suite D, or you can give them a call at 251-867-4316.
This story is from my high school days, I guess you might say. And, we in education sometimes belabor that things are no longer like they used to be. We complain about that sometimes. We've had all these changes. Now we have to do this, we have to do that. We have so many rules and regulations and things. But anyway, to make a long story short, I got to thinking about when I was in high school and the rules that we had, which didn't seem to be very many. And so I wrote this one. It's called 3 Licks or 3 Days.
Yeah, and this is a good one because my wife is in education, as your wife was as well. And I tell you what, if we subscribe to the theory that kind of is laid out in this story today, we probably wouldn't have quite as many issues that we deal with. So, folks need to listen to this one. This is a good one.
This is called 3 Licks or 3 Days. I'm not sure exactly when it happened or who was primarily responsible. It happened during my early days in education, and there was no special TV report or article in the Mobile Press or the Bruton Standard. I'm not sure whether it was a political move or the state superintendent set out a decree. But sometime around the end of the 70s or the early 80s, high schools took the concept of 3 licks or 3 days out of the educational process. I believe it was the biggest mistake we ever made in education in the state of Alabama. I was a student at T.R. Miller High School from 1970 to 74. I'm sure we had some kind of handbook with some kind of rules in it, but I don't remember reading it. Today, schools have pages of rules, categorize them as to the severity should a student violate one. They're complete with a punishment for each offense. In the 70s, we were pretty simple. Don't cheat, don't cuss, don't steal, be respectful to adults, don't mess with other students, don't fight. Most of this is covered in the 10 Commandments. That pretty much covered everything. And there was one punishment in those days: 3 licks or 3 days. It was the greatest thing ever invented in school. I'm not sure if George Washington, Abe Lincoln, Thomas Edison, or Bear Bryant came up with it, but it was perfect. It was easy to administer. It was constitutional. We were guaranteed a fair and speedy trial. And it was speedy and mostly fair. And it wasn't hard to understand. Best of all, the student got to pick their own punishment: 3 licks or 3 days. It covered all offenses. If you got in a fight, 3 licks or 3 days. If you cheated on a test, 3 licks or 3 days. If you let a cuss word slip, even if it was a compound cuss word, 3 licks or 3 days. Now, we studied the whole concept in those days just in case they nailed you for something. First of all, it really wasn't much of a choice. If you had any manhood about you at all, you took the 3 licks. I remember a guy one time who said, "I didn't do it. I'm not taking the 3 licks." About 10 minutes later, he comes back to class. He was a little watery-eyed. We asked for an explanation. I said I wasn't taking the 3 licks. Just give me the 3 days, he said. Then he called my dad, and my dad said, either take the 3 licks from him, or I'm going to come up there and give you the 3 licks myself. No way that was happening. I just had to take them from the principal. One of the best things about the policy was that you could screw up at school, get caught, take your 3 licks, and they would never even call your parents. There was this unwritten rule that what went on in school stayed in school. If your mother was friends with one of the teachers, that teacher wouldn't even tell her. It was the 70s. We had integrity.
We're taking a quick break from the story to say thank you to Steve Nelson and Larry Crosby of Bruton Insurance Agency for sponsoring this week's episode. Bruton Insurance Agency has the team ready to service your personal and commercial insurance needs. Stop by to see them at 1014 Douglas Avenue in Suite D, or you can give them a call at 251-867-4316. Now back to the episode.
Today in education, we often talk about the importance of parental involvement. Not in the 70s. The last thing we wanted was our parents showing up at school. take the 3 licks. Administrators love the rule. Being an administrator can be a really tough and stressful job today. But in those days, they lived for someone to get in trouble so they could give them the 3 licks. We would say, "Hey, how'd old Bill take those 3 licks today?" Our principal, Mr. Pettis, would laugh and say, "He took them like a man." When you took the 3 licks, it was impossible to do it quietly. The booms would echo throughout the office area and down the first hallway. People would just stand there for a minute to see who was going to come from behind the door and what kind of reaction they were going to get from the paddlee. Slight smiles, laughter, tears, or this kind of grim, mad look. The one thing you did not want to do was tell the other folks that it didn't even hurt. Administrators never forgot that kind of stuff. Memories like an elephant. You would pay for it the next time. They didn't punish repeat offenders any worse. If you got caught multiple times, it was still 3 licks or 3 days. There were times when it was like a badge of honor. So let's say you called in an order down at Oaks Cafe. Now, Oaks Cafe was a local beer joint that had some great hamburgers. And so you called in an order down at Oaks and you skipped school just for a few minutes to go get some burgers for you and your buddies. About 1:15 or so, they would call you up to the office and they'd say, "Hey, David, I was going up Highway 31 when I went by Oaks and I saw you coming out of there with a big sack. Can you explain that?" And then, of course, old David would say, "No, sir, I was just hungry." And the principal would say, "Okay, well, who all would you get a burger for?" And you would just smile and say, "I ate them all. I'll take the 3 licks." Never give up your buddies. We called that taking one for the team, and we understood team in the 70s. It wasn't like there was no pain involved. Those 3 licks actually stung pretty good. It was enough to make you think twice about whether what you were about to do was worth the agony. It was also important to know who was swinging the board in the office that day. From the educational standpoint, there was little or no missed class time, no zeros for missed work. If you smarted off in math class while the teacher was working a problem, you could get sent to the office, take your 3 licks, and be back in class before she finished with the problem on the board. I missed 3 licks for 3 days. We have a whole generation of educators who didn't even know what the term means. Today, it's just a faint memory from a time when going to school each morning could be educational and a lot of fun as well.
Coach, I hadn't heard the term 3 licks or 3 days in a long, long time, and I graduated from T.R. Miller in 1991, and by the time I got to high school in 1987, I guess I was a freshman, I mean, the paddling was gone, and I think it pretty much phased out at the high school level, at least probably in the mid-'80s. You're talking about the 70s, but when I was even in elementary school, there was still paddling. And where I went to elementary school, it was if you got 1 lick or 1 day. I guess, as you get older, you get it progresses 2 or 3, whatever. And so only one instance, thankfully, Mom, I had to take the 1 lick, and I don't think she ever found out about that, and probably till today. But
she may just be finding out now.
Probably so. But I mean, really, that story is really it's a commentary on where we are as a society today, right? And so, as you were coaching and in education in those years where you did not have that stick, I guess, and you got the carrot and the stick as far as how to discipline. How was that trying to make people be accountable and to make them do right when you didn't have that? You didn't have one of the major, I guess, weapons at your at your disposal.
Yeah. Well, you just had to find other ways to do it. It was hardest, I think, when we were, as you might say, transitioning over, where the basic came and said, "We really don't want you to paddle folks anymore." I was in PE, I taught at the middle school and later to high school, so we would paddle folks on occasion. But finally, like I said, by the time we got to the 80s, sometime we just kind of quit doing that. So, like, for example, in PE, I was a sit-up guy. Mm-hmm. You messed up, you did something, you're going to do 100 sit-ups for me. And I would sit there and I would count every one of them. just for the fun of it to be able to do that. And it helped deal with a lot of the nitpicky stuff because we're in PE. Now, somebody's going to let slip a word that they shouldn't say in PE. Mm-hmm. And we shouldn't have to send them to the office for that. Right. They got better things to do in the office to do with that. So I just say, okay, that's 100 sit-ups. Mm-hmm. We'd come back in, I'd count them. So every day when I got through PE, I counted sit-ups. And in football, we had discipline situations and everything. We did a lot of running. Many days I sat up there after practice and watched people run back and forth. So I could do it because of the physical stuff. A little hard to do in the classroom, but to be able to handle some of those really nitpicky things that need dealing with, but it's difficult sometimes.
Yeah, well, I don't want this next comment on my part to be an indictment on parents as a whole, because I don't think it is. But one of the things that you were talking about in the story, little David. So little David gets in trouble and he takes it 3 days. Well, he calls mom or daddy. And mom and daddy are ticked, man. They're going to give him worse at home than he's going to get if you take the 3 licks at school. And so he comes to his senses and takes his 3 licks from the principal. I don't think there's as much of that anymore. And I guess what I'm getting at is, used to be, when I was coming up anyway, my mom and dad automatically took the side of the school. And I had to prove that I was right. But sometimes I think today it gets reversed. Was that something that you had to deal with? And then how do you deal with that aspect too, when little Johnny automatically thinks, well, gosh, I'm just going to go tell mom or dad, and they're going to be on my side, I know, because those roles seem to be reversed a little bit.
It is, and it's really very difficult because a lot of times, again, what you're talking about is small things. They're just small things. But it had, in later years, was more difficult. Parents a little more nitpicky about some of those things, than they were at one time. Now, again, back when I was coming through in the 70s, if I did something wrong, got in trouble at school, I do not want my parents to find out. Okay, I just do not want that to happen, which was difficult for me because my mother was a bookkeeper for the school. She was secretary at some point in time, so that was pretty difficult for me to pull off. But it's just one of those things.
Yeah, and I'm with you. If we brought back 3 licks in 3 days, I think society would be probably in a much better place. Today's episode is sponsored by Bruton Insurance Agency. Give them a call at 251-867-4316 or stop by and see them at 1014 Douglas Avenue in Suite D. We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if you did, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes and Spotify. It definitely helps us in the ratings, and it also makes it easier for other folks to find the podcast. And as always, a big thank you to producer and editor Carrie Wolf. Playing Above the Line is sponsored by Aviso Group. If you want to know more about who we are and what we do, you can visit our website at avisogroup.com. That's AVIZO group.com. You can also check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thanks for listening.